Hello everyone, today we're looking at the newly released deck building game, Beneath Oresa. This is another game in the style of Slay the Spire, but it does have its own unique twists to the genre, and if you are a fan of the genre, it may be worth a look. Based on my experience with the game, I think this game is going to appeal to some, but not all fans of the genre, and it largely depends on what you want to get out of the game. For reasons that I'm going to get into through the video, I feel that the game could use a little bit longer time in early access just to iron out some of the odd kinks here and there. Uh, but even without that, I think there's enough there that will hold the appeal for casual enjoyers of deck building games, and also those that enjoy playing deck builders without the need to build a perfect deck. Uh, the most obvious unique feature of the game is the way it looks. The game is beautiful and cinematic in feel. Unlike most other games in this genre, all the characters and monsters have full 3D models, and they have been beautifully rendered in a sort of hand-drawn comic book aesthetic. They have good looking textures, and the lighting makes it all come together. The characters feel like they inhabit their world, and you can see them traversing the map as you go deeper and deeper beneath Oresa. Character is unlocked for the first playthrough. As you continue to play the game, it will unlock additional characters, and each character has their own set of 3 cards that they start off with, and they also have a unique trait. Additionally, you can choose a companion character, and these can add their own set of powers and cards to yours. Companions need to be leveled up, and as you level them up, they will gain additional cards or traits that can help you. Different companions could, in theory, change your approach to building a deck with a particular character. There are companions that specialize in fighting elite monsters, or one of them can add armor for each relic or antiquarium, as they are called, that you own. There's another one that gives you bonuses every time you slay an enemy. There's enough variety here that you can kind of tailor them to your playstyle to some degree. So the 3 factions that players can choose from are the Tainted Ones, the House of Agisa de Ferrari, and the Guild of Ruin Farers. Each one of them comes with their own set of cards that will be available for players to add to their decks. So basically, if you choose characters from each faction, like every time you choose a different faction, you get different cards that that are available to add to your deck. So each character also has their own set of cards, as I mentioned, and then some companions also have cards that can be added to your deck once they're the right level. So there is quite a bit of variety that you can unlock. Because you have to unlock the variety by playing the game, and initially there's a complete lack of variety, as there's only one companion and one character that you can play with. That might not necessarily be a problem, except that this is maybe not a problem because this is ostensibly a staple of how this genre works. But the one character that you're allowed to play with initially has an oddly difficult trait to use. This character's name is Sora. She is one of the Tainted Ones. The Tainted Ones are survivors of what they call the Cobalt curse, and that normally turns people into brainless cyborg murderers. Lovely. But the Tainted Ones have managed to halt the progress of the curse, and in the case of Sora specifically, she's able to take advantage of that in her unique trait, which is called Unleash the Cobalt Curse. When her virus meter reaches 8, she transforms into a quote-unquote killing machine. To increase her meter, you have to add virus cards into your deck. And to do that, you have to basically play cards that add virus cards, right? So her initial deck comes with 2 cards that add virus cards, and there are 14 cards total. So there's 2 of 14, right? which is okay, maybe. But you are adding cards after every encounter. There is no possibility of skipping adding cards. So keep that in mind. There are places where you can remove cards, but it's not a guarantee. It's relatively random when you can add or remove cards outside of combat. And because of that, and because most cards don't add viruses into your deck, it can make interacting with her major trait difficult, unless you are intentionally trying to build up her virus cards. But you can just see that if you're trying to get her meter to 8, and you have 2 cards in your deck that can add viruses to your meter, it's gonna take you, at least 4 runs through your entire deck before you can do that. And in most of the initial starting fights, you never get there because it's like the fights just don't last that long. And unless you are intentionally adding additional cards that will add viruses to your deck as you play after every encounter, then you're basically diluting the 2 cards that she does have, and so it makes it harder and harder to interact with her major trait, which is just weird for the starting character. Especially because later on you unlock a second tainted one, and his trait is called Absolute Violence. It's a lot more straightforward to interact with. Basically, each time you play a melee attack, your damage increases by 1. And you add a virus card randomly to either the discard pile or the draw pile. And lastly, if you remove any virus cards from your deck, then that takes your damage down by 1. So basically, you add a virus, it adds damage. You remove virus, it lowers your damage. So it's really easy, it's straightforward. You understand what adds viruses, what doesn't add viruses. You don't need special cards to add viruses, although they do exist. But you're not dependent on them. So it's pretty easy and straightforward to make his meter climb up, and doing so is pretty predictable. So you basically just have to make sure that you have lots of melee cards if you want to make the meter go up. So contrasting that with Sora, I don't understand why they put Sora as the one unlockable or the initial character, because she is so difficult to use. I think it's going to make some players immediately think the game is bad. That brings me to the second thing that might turn off some players. And that's not all characters seem designed to allow for any type of deck to work with them, right? So some characters like Sora, it feels like with Sora you have to add more cards that add viruses to her deck in order to use her trait if you want to play with her. Because if you don't want to play with her trait, then why are you selecting her, right? Whereas others like Jokan, he can work with just about any deck, right? Because he just works with melee attack cards, and you're gonna get those. You're gonna get plenty of those, and you can sort of figure out the ratio of melee cards to non-melee cards, and just kind of figure out how you're gonna interact with the meter that way. It feels much more workable, and you can use this with any kind of deck. Here's another example. So after you do enough runs with Beneath Oresa, you'll be able to play with 2 of the Ruinfarers. The Ruinfarers are gunslingers. Okay, the gunslingers have an interesting mechanic where they start each battle with a gun that's loaded with 5 bullets. As you play cards that fire your gun, you use your bullets, and you need a way of replenishing those bullets. Now, one of the characters, Flynn, he has his trait just innately gives you a random bullet at the start of every run. And yeah, that does mean that there are different types of bullets and that there are bullets with effects and whatnot. I'm not going to get into that. irrelevant for this, but it does make it a little more interesting. But anyways, contrasting that to this other gunslinger, and in fact the one that you unlock first, her innate trait gives her a melee attack. There's no interaction with her gun whatsoever, and so the only way that she can get bullets back once she uses them is through playing cards that have bullets in them. Which is also the same for Flynn, except he has a built-in ability to get at least one bullet back every turn. So there's an interesting split there, where some characters, their trait directly is easy to play with other cards, and then some other characters are dependent on getting specific types of cards in order for some of their class abilities to work at all. There's nothing inherently wrong, I think, with having complicated mechanics and even punishing mechanics that, punish the player for not doing the right thing. But if you're going to have these, it's helpful to have a good way of explaining what's going on to the player without resorting to them just failing runs because they misplayed their character. When it's not explained to you and you just fail, it just feels bad, and I think it's going to feel to some players like the game is broken. And that gets me to one of my other points of criticism, which is that there's not enough information about game mechanics. In particular, there's not enough tooltips. Just as an example, I'm not going to go over every single instance, but as an example, there's tons of icons everywhere on these cards, right? I mean, and that's totally normal. But most of these icons have no tooltips. So if you hover over them, you can't tell. There's no name for them. There's no explanation as to what they do. So you start in your head to name them the way that they look. So, like, you have red sword, or blue eye, or green hand. You start to run into trouble when suddenly you run into red gun. How is red gun different from red sword? And when do the card interactions matter or not? So, like, for example, if a card says, when you attack, does that mean it works with red swords and red guns, or only red swords? It's not always obvious, and I feel like that some of that text could be cleaned up a little bit, because I found myself sometimes using cards that just didn't work the way I thought they would, because the description was ambiguous, let's say. Other examples of undocumented things are the rewards for facing different encounters. You are given a choice: go with encounter A or encounter B. Sometimes you can tell one is going to be maybe more difficult than the other because one is elite and the other one isn't. Or sometimes they both look like normal encounters, but one of them says better reward. Sometimes the better reward encounters also have some sort of penalty to your character as you go in, like maybe you start with lower health or a debuff or something. But what does that mean? What does better reward mean? It's not clear at all whether the risk is worth the reward. And if you are trying to min-max your run, that makes it very difficult. So you're going to tend to opt to ignore the rewards if you're trying to play it safe. But often, encounters are difficult enough that you wonder, was the other one really that much harder? I don't know. So when you start a new run, another way that another place where there's not enough information is when you start a new run. You get to select from a variety of different expeditions. Each expedition has a different icon with up to 3 skull icons in it, as well as a modifier for the run, such as, you get 10 maximum hit points, but you start with negative 10 hit points. But there's no description of what the skull rating is or what it does. I've been presuming it makes it's the difficulty to run, but I really don't know, and it's not clear to me exactly how it affects things, because I have run into 1 skull runs which is the common thing when you start off, and then you eventually start seeing the runs with choose skulls on them. I'm not sure what the difference is there. Also, at the end of each floor, there's a boss, right? That's completely normal and expected. But there are different bosses that you can face. And they do act quite differently from each other. And you can't tell which one you're going to face until you get to it. So you can't build a deck that's going to perform well against a particular monster if you know that you're going to face them, like you can in Slay the Spire. And in fact, in Slay the Spire, there's some monsters that if you don't tailor your deck for them, it would make it very difficult to win against them, right? And I feel like it's the same way here to some degree. But yeah, I have found where I've been building my deck a particular way to face a monster, and then I get to the end and it's a completely different boss. So I feel some gamers are going to enjoy the randomness of the encounters. But I feel that if your goal in a card game is to eliminate randomness, you're going to have a hard time with this game. If you enjoy deck building games and enjoy the surprise of randomness that comes from not knowing what you're going to face, then you're going to get plenty out of Beneath Oresa. The game's also going to appeal to people that like to figure out the ins and outs of the mechanics, how the game works, and especially when there's little to no documentation or tutorials or anything like that. But if you are interested in dissecting the probabilities by examining the information that the game gives you, if you're interested in min-maxing the perfect deck for every boss, you're gonna have a hard time doing that because the game just doesn't tell you what's gonna happen, and it just feels random. The other thing that I feel I should mention is the price of the game, because that can make a difference. Let's be honest. This game is normally $25. Right now, as of September 20th, 2023, it is on sale right now for $18. I think your mileage will vary. I think that it's a pretty low price at $18 compared to some of the other games. So if you like deck building games in general, and this game is beautiful to boot, I think it's a relatively easy purchase overall because you can get quite a bit of enjoyment out of it. But again, I feel like if you want to tailor specific decks, you're going to be frustrated in this game, so don't get it. But for everyone else, I feel like this is a relatively easy purchase, despite the problems. I do hope they continue to work on the game to clean up some of these little details, but even without that expectation, I had a good time with the game overall. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Please like and subscribe.